I hope with the Hakdama from the previous year and the little bit of guidance I gave, it was slightly clearer what I was trying to bring out from the notes. The first horror I made in the previous year is that, or actually the second point I made in the previous year, is that the conclusion of the Gemara is that the Kula Alma Tiltul min HaTzad Shmei Tiltul. Everyone agrees that Tiltul min HaTzad is Shmei Tiltul. In other words, it's not considered an acceptable way to move Muktza. And the reason for Rabbi Yehuda ben Lakish being lenient is because of an exception of Adam Bohul al Meso, that the stress of loss of the mace carrying for the dead will end up causing someone to transgress a greater issa, and therefore we're lenient to do a narrow issa. So this was really the first thing I wanted to look at, which is I printed a riff and a Rabbeinu Yonah. Sorry, I think I just printed the riff. Is that right? But I printed the riff and the run on the riff. So the riff says as follows. So the riff says as follows.
Can I ask which quote is the riff?
It's the source 4.
Source 4, thank you.
No, the one I sent. The one I sent today. Yeah, the one I sent today. So in source 4, the riff says the Hainu Tama de Rabbi Yehuda. But there's two parts in the riff. I separated the riff into paragraphs. The first part of source 4. It's all one riff, so I just printed it together. But the first part of the riff is how he learns pshat in the maskana of the Gemara about Rabbi Yehuda ben Lakish, and the second part of the riff is where the riff addresses what we'll call Tosfos' question. I mean, it's non-historical how I'm saying this. The riff independently, the riff didn't learn Tosfos. The riff was a touch before the Tosfos. But effectively, Tosfos lines up all the sugyas that contradicts the conclusion of our Gemara, and the riff gives his response to it, and Tosfos gives his response. So those are the two parts of the riff. The first part of the riff says, "V'hainu Talmud Rabbi Yehuda ben Lakish, v'tersh Adam Bohul al Mesoi, ilo shorisle tiltul drabonon." Since someone is stressed by their mace, if you don't allow them tiltul drabonon, Muktza is drabonon, osi lidei kibo draisa, they'll end up extinguishing the fire to avoid their relative's body being cremated and transgress the draisa of kibo. Then he brings the Halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda ben Lakish, and then he says, "Shamina minad tiltul min HaTzad shmei tiltul." That Tiltul min HaTzad is Tiltul, like the Maskana of the Gemara. So normally you're not allowed to do Tiltul min HaTzad, but they allowed you to do it for a mace. So the run on the riff is medayik from the riff that Rabbi Yehuda ben Lakish only allows Tiltul min HaTzad for a mace, but not general Muktza. In other words, regular Muktza, we wouldn't suspend the prohibition of regular Muktza because of the need to protect the mace. Only Tiltul min HaTzad, that's how the run is medayik from the riff. Then he brings that the Rambam argues on this, and the Rambam says that all Muktza is allowed because of Tiltul min HaTzad, and I think I hope I printed the Rambam here. Yeah, the Rambam in source 6 at the top of page 3 says, Mesa Mutul L'chama, Maniach Lav Kika Itinek Metaltulei, that's our Gemara, to Kika Itinek. V'chenim Noflo Deleka B'chotza Sheyesh B'meis, if there's a fire and if you need to move the dead body out, Maniach Lav Kika Itinek Metaltulei, you again to Kika Itinek. If you don't have that solution, you can nonetheless move the maze, etc. So the Rambam says that you can move the mace. He doesn't mention a word about Tiltul min HaTzad. So the Rambam seems to learn that you're allowed to move the mace even without Tiltul min HaTzad. This is what the Rambam brings from the Rambam. So just to summarize, in the Askana of the Gemara, whether the allowance to move the mace is only Tiltul min HaTzad or it's all Muktza is suspended for the mace, seems to be a machlokas between the simplest reading of the riff which the Ran points out, seems to say that Tiltul and HaTzad is allowed to save the dead body, but not regular Muktza. And the Rambam seems to say that any Muktza is suspended in order to move the dead body. You can move the dead body directly without Tiltul and HaTzad. That's the summary of the Ran. That's the first point I wanted to mention. The Ran, at the end of the Ran, he also says Rashi. This would appear to be the view of Rashi. I couldn't find the Rashi. I mean, the Rashi bias doesn't seem to give any diuk. I don't know if anyone found any success in this matter. Did anyone spot the Rashi? Or okay. If people haven't yet had the chance to go through these sources, then there will not be a Shiur Sunday. I'm actually out of town Sunday, so please go through the Maram Komis and anyway, this is what I wanted to bring out. The Rif. Have a look at the Rif. I think the diuk in the Rif is. I mean, the Ram thinks it's a good diuk, so I'm not in the business of arguing the Ram, but I think we can see the diuk in the Rif. The Rambam, I think, is very, very clear, not like that. The Rambam very clearly says that all Muktza are suspended, and the Rashi that the Ram quotes, I don't know where this Rashi is. It's not a Rashi as we have it. I saw one of the Carbon Sun, one of the later Achronim seem to say that maybe the Ram had a different case than Rashi, but either way, the text as we have in Rashi doesn't seem to give any evidence about this at all. Yeah, I couldn't see anything in Rashi there either. Yeah. Rashi on the Rif was Rashi wrote on the Gemara in the late 1200s, early 1300s. The Rif became very popular in Germany, and an anonymous person, shortened Rashi to invent a Rashi on the Rif. So he cut out all the Rashi comments that aren't relevant to the Rif and created a Rashi on the Rif, and also changed the lazim of Rashi. When Rashi translates the words into foreign language, Rashi translates into French, they translate into German. So this work took place in Germany, and the anonymous editor of this shortened version of Rashi was using a different manuscript of Rashi to the one we have, and therefore very occasionally it would be different to the version of Rashi that we have. Nonetheless, in this respect, it doesn't. There wasn't a variant case that I could find, so I don't know. I don't know where that comes from. So that's either way. That's what I was able to say on this. The Shulchan Aruch, by the way, I think I hope I printed the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch in Shin Yod Aleph, Sif Aleph. This is source 3. The Shulchan Aruch says that first of all in the Rambam. So before we get to the Shulchan Aruch, in the Rambam it's clear that even though they allowed you to move a mace because of the Zaleika, nonetheless, if there is a kikkar or tinuk option available, you should go for that. So it's better to go via kikkar or tinuk. The Rambam doesn't say that you should try and do Tiltul and HaTzad if you can. So it's interesting. The Rambam misses out a stage. The Rambam says either do kikkar or tinuk, or just move the dead body because you're stuck. But he doesn't mention trying to do Tiltul and HaTzad as a possible solution. The Shulchan Aruch adds in and says that if you can do Tiltul and HaTzad, then that's better still. So basically, the Shulchan Aruch gives a 3-layered solution to saving the dead body from the fire. Either ideally do kikkar tinuk, which is l'chatchila, is a good solution. If that's not possible, then do Tiltul and HaTzad. And if that's not possible, then do direct movement of Muktza. And the Rambam doesn't mention that middle layer. We just have a quick look in the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch as follows. This is source 3 on page 2. A body that's vulnerable to fire. So the best solution is kikkar tinuk. Then the next best solution is to have a Tiltul and HaTzad, roll the body from bed to bed, from stretcher to stretcher, just Tiltul and HaTzad. Then you can move it Tiltul Gomel. And then he adds in, this is all assuming it's within one Rishus. If it's out of the Rishus, then obviously you have Chol Shabbos dry, so again, of Iksar, and therefore this wouldn't be a solution. So this is the view of the Shulchan Aruch. It's clear that if in Halacha L'Maisa, the Shulchan Aruch saying that if Tiltul and HaTzad is not possible, you can move the mace directly. Just something for us to think about, and we'll get back to this later, is would it be better to move the mace via the stretcher, the mitzvah, or move the mace directly? Is there no difference? In other words, in theory, we could have meant 4 layers. Again, the Rambam says if you can do kikkar tinuk, and if you can't, you can just move the mace. The Shulchan Aruch adds in, if you can do kikar tanuk, if you can't, do tiltul min HaTzad, roll the mace from stretcher to stretcher, and if you can't do that, then move the mace. We could add in another layer, which is if you can't do that, move the mace via the mitar, and if you even can't do that, then move the mace directly. Now, the reason I mention this point, this is very far from Halacha Maisa, hopefully these scenarios, but the reason I mention this is because it makes us think again about, I think someone mentioned this in the last year already, which is moving a mace via moving the stretcher, tiltul min HaTzad at all, or is it halachically identical to moving the dead body directly? Again, rolling the mace from mitar to mitar is called tiltul min HaTzad. That's the Gemara. What about moving a dead body directly on a stretcher, just carrying a stretcher? Is that called tiltul min HaTzad? So you could say it's tiltul min HaTzad, because at the end of the day, you're not directly engaging with the Muktza. You're moving the mitar, which is moving the mace. Or you could say that's a trivial, that's not called tiltul min HaTzad. Tiltul min HaTzad is where you have two separate objects and I move one and through that cause the other one to move. If I'm directly moving an object, that by moving the mitar on which it rests, and the mitar is the stretcher upon all the bed upon which the mace beds, that's in no sense a meaningful tiltul min HaTzad. If you're doing that, you're effectively moving the mace directly, and that's not a middle stage. The Shulchan Aruch would seem to imply that the Shulchan Aruch doesn't bother suggesting better to move the mitar rather than move the mace directly, seeming to imply that the Shulchan Aruch thinks that this is not called tiltul min HaTzad, this is already moving Muktza directly, and therefore there's no halachic benefit in not moving the mace directly.
Easy way of doing it.
No, so for sure, rolling is better than moving it sitting on the stretcher. The question is moving it while it's sitting on the stretcher also is better than moving the mace itself?
The first time the toss on the ring talks about
yes. Mitzvah achas is worse than rolling, but do we have evidence that mitzvah achas is no better than directly moving the mace? That's the question. Yeah. Yeah. A very good question. So Rashi translates tiltul min HaTzad as kilachayad, as a shinoi. The other Rishonim don't, and don't suggest kilachayad as an option. We'll see, maybe at the end, we'll try and look whether kilachayad is a better solution than tiltul min HaTzad or not. But you're right. No one mentions that as a solution. It could be because that's a generic thing. Whenever you're in a situation where you're in a b'diavad situation, kilachayad is always better than doing it directly. But yeah, I touched on it actually before the break. This question, we'll get back to it again. We'll get back to it again later. Yeah.
Must be understanding that you are moving it from bed to bed using your left hand or using an indirect. So you are doing kilachayad from mitzvah to mitzvah.
100%. But in Rashi, the whole halachic logic of the Gemara, the whole knowledge of the Gemara is only kilachayad. You're not even rolling it via the mitzvah. Tosfos and other Rishonim learn you're moving the mitzvah, you're tilting the mitzvah to move the mace. Rashi learns you're literally moving the mace. You're just doing it kilachayad. The question now is, what would the other Rishonim say about the kilachayad suggestion?
Have to understand the words mitzvah and mitzvah.
In Rashi, that's not.
You just ignore. You just read that from bed to bed equals. There's just no.
Correct. It's not of critical in Rashi. From bed to bed is not the critically important halachic point. The relevant point is simply kilachayad. Exactly right. Yes, that's where you have to. I'm not saying it's a great reading, but that's what you have to say in Rashi. I don't see a way of avoiding that problem. Yeah. Okay. The next.
Sorry, can I ask about? Sorry,
yeah.
quickly. Kikar and Tinok. Is that what's the heta there? Is it now permitted? It's not Muktza. I don't know. I don't remember when we discussed it last term.
Yeah.
Why is that? Why is it?
Okay, so we did discuss it last time, and I don't want to focus on it because it's a separate thing, and I encourage everyone to listen to the recordings again. But very briefly, one suggestion of the Lomdus was that the action is considered as associating itself with the non-Muktza, moving the non-Muktza item, and the Muktza item is just incidental as opposed to being the focus of your action. So the mice you're doing is moving the kick and tinuk, and the mace just is incidental to that. Exactly how to say that's why we discussed in the previous year, but that's it's something in that somewhere in that ballpark. Martin here.
Just possibly to come to Rashi's rescue, Rashi may not be directly translating the HaTzad as Kalafayad, but just giving the explanation for why rolling it from meter to meter is preferable, is allowable, because that's a form of Kalafayad, but equally any other Kalafayad would be equally accepted.
I 100% agree with that. I think that's absolutely right. All I'm saying though is that it comes out that mitzvah and mitzvah is not critical in the Londers. The point is kilachayad, and you're right, mitzvah is just an example of kilachayad, yeah. But that is definitely how Rashi would read things. But it turns out that mitzvah is not really an essential halachic feature of it. The main point is kilachayad, and we could dream up other kilachayad scenarios, yeah. The next thing I want to focus on, which again I touched in the introductory shiur on Sunday, and now I'd like to sort of look at the sources a little bit more thoroughly, is what is the Rishonim all address question of the contradiction effectively between the sugyas. So our sugya seems to say that Tiltul min HaTzad shemei Tiltul, and therefore it's asa, and Tosfos brings an array of sugyas that disagree. Not in this year probably, but in next year we'll look at alternative answers to the question, because the Rif gives an answer to the question. I printed the Ritva, I printed the Rashba, and so on and so forth. But for now, we're just going to focus on Tosfos's answer. So Tosfos says that if you are doing Tiltul min HaTzad for the sake of the Muktza, then it's a problem. If you're doing Tiltul min HaTzad for the sake of something that's Heta, then it's allowed. That's Tosfos's answer. So now we need to ask ourselves, what's that distinction? Why should it make a difference? So I have to confess here, I had and continue to have an enormous bias to the answer, because I have a very beautiful and not overly complicated conceptual answer to the question. But I think there are a number of rayos that this answer is wrong, despite finding it intellectually appealing and a nice own zigga. But I share it with you for what it's worth. So my initial thought as to why this, what's the distinction? Why should it make a difference if I'm moving it for the sake of the Muktza or for the sake of Heta? So my initial thought was what I consider to be a very clean, nice svara, which is the whole logic of Tiltul min HaTzad, is that I'm moving something else. I'm not moving a Muktza item. The Muktza item gets moved incidentally, but I'm not directly moving the Muktza item. That's the logic of Tiltul min HaTzad. So therefore, there is a very nice svara to argue that if you are moving it for the sake of something mutter, then again, let's take the scenario. I need to pull a vegetable out of earth, and the earth is getting shaken off while I do it. So what's my action? It's an action of taking a vegetable, moving a vegetable. Incidentally, the earth gets shaken off. So there you've got a logic of Tiltul min HaTzad. The earth getting shaken off is merely incidental. But if my whole purpose is to move the earth, and I'm just moving the earth through another object, that's not Tiltul min HaTzad in conceptually. That's trying to move earth via another object. So, and then that would be a very good explanation of Tosfos' answers. All the scenarios that Tosfos brings, I'm trying to move Heta, just incidentally, I'm moving Muktza in the process of so doing. Whereas here with the mace, I'm trying to move the mace. So the fact that I'm doing it indirectly, why should indirectly make a difference? It's not magic over here. It's not that I do it indirectly. The question is, am I engaging with Muktza? If I'm moving Muktza for the point of moving Muktza, and I happen to be moving something else via something else, why should that make a difference? Whereas if I'm trying to move Heta, and just incidentally in the process of moving the Heta, Muktza is affected, there you can hit the svara of Tiltul min HaTzad. So Tiltul min HaTzad should be thought of as a less engagement with the Muktza. So Tosfos' Havamina was, any case when I'm moving something indirectly, it's mutter. Because at the end of the day, I'm not engaging directly with the mutter, so with the Muktza. Tosfos' answer is no. Tiltul min HaTzad is only a svara to allow if I'm not directly engaging with the Muktza, where I don't have intention to move the Muktza, where my intention is with the Heta. So it comes out in Tosfos' universe. The Manda Omer, who says Tiltul min HaTzad, lo shmei Tiltul, holds that even if my intention is to move the Muktza, if I'm doing it indirectly, that's less of an engagement and therefore allowed. The Manda Omer that holds Tiltul min HaTzad shmei Tiltul says if I'm moving it indirectly with intention to move Issa, then that's a problem. But if I'm moving it indirectly with intention to move the Heta, and Issa is just incidental, I would agree with that. So this is, to me, seems a very blunt, straight way of thinking about the logic of the sugya. And it also answers the conundrum that someone was mentioning over here, which is why. I'm sorry, you'll tell me who it was when I say this. Which is why, what would be the logic of saying you have to be mena'eh rather than directly move the mitzvah? If you're allowed to directly move a mitzvah, if that's called also tiltul min HaTzad, why would you first have to try and roll it from mitzvah to mitzvah? Why would that be a better solution? And the answer is because there's a sliding scale of indirect engagement with the Muktza. And therefore, there is a man who holds, even if I'm indirectly engaging the Muktza via another object with intent, doesn't matter, I'm indirectly engaging the Muktza. There's a man that says only allowed if I'm engaging without intent. I'm trying to move the Heta, but not the Muktza, and it's just incidental. And then on that spectrum is also the idea of being Manai. If I'm just shaking the mitzvah, rolling the mitzvah from, Manai means casting it off. I'm just, casting the mitzvah off from bed to bed. That's more lenient than directly carrying the mitzvah because that's a lower level of engagement. So I consider that to be a nice svara in the sugya. However, we're going to see that I think there are sources that demonstrate that this is not correct.
The first source, in a sense, is not correct because potentially that we're talking about a mate here. We're not about a classical Muktza item. This is a mate where there is some rationale to enable you to move it. It's not just like a car, moving a car. This is a mate where you want to chaburah mate, move it into a personal position. So it has an element of allowance within it.
The leniency of mate is only in the maskana of the Gemara in the case of Zaleika, because of the panic associated with it. We're talking about the regular dinim of Tiltul min HaTzad. And again, at no stage does Tosfos suggest that mace is unique in regular hilchos of Tiltul min HaTzad. When all the Rishonim line up all the sugyas, they don't say mace is different. The unique case where mace is different, you could have said that mace is more stringent or more lenient. You could have had, they don't say that. So in regular Tiltul min HaTzad, they don't say that. Okay, so this is what I consider to be a nice reading in the Gemara, and in Tosfos rather, that Tiltul min HaTzad, indirect engagement with an object, when my intention is to move that object, is too direct, is still considered direct. I'm still engaging with the object, with the Muktza. Whereas Tiltul min HaTzad, when I'm engaging indirect with an object, when my whole intention is to move something else, that's sufficiently indirect for everyone for that to be more lenient. So again, I'm moving the parsnip and the dirt falls off. I'm engaging with the parsnip, the dirt is incidental. Moving the stretch of the mitzvah with intention to move the mace, even though technically that's to something else, according to the man Omer, that Tiltul min HaTzad shmei Tiltul, that wouldn't be allowed. So this is one part through the sugya. The Ritva that I printed in source 7, in source 8, says a different svara. The Ritva says that the allowance is l'tzorech Shabbos. So the Ritva, again, like Tosfos, lines up all the sugyas that are problematic. And the Ritva says, V'yesha tarit. So this is in source 8, on page 3, the third paragraph. He says, V'yesha tarit, the low dummy, that is not comparable. The hacha, l'tzorech dava oso, ha'oso, kegon meis, Tiltul min HaTzad, shmei Tiltul v'asa. Avol kulu idach, dominum ba'alma hava l'tzorech dava mutza, l'tzorech Shabbos, l'ficha chitziru by Tiltul min HaTzad. So Ritzel says as follows. He says, mathematically, he says the same distinction as Tosfos. He says, here you're trying to move the dead body. There you're trying to get hold of the mutter item. You're trying to lift the vegetable out of the ground, and the dirt is falling off. But he then explains the logic, and he says the answer is, since it's the tzorech dava hamutter, it's something that's mutter, and the tzorech Shabbos for the sake of Shabbos, therefore hitiru, therefore they allowed it. So the Ritva gives a second svara as to what the distinction between Tiltul min HaTzad and in a case where you're doing a tzorech dava asa, and Tiltul min HaTzad in a case where you're doing a tzorech dava ha mutter. And he says, if you're doing a tzorech dava asa, they didn't see any reason to waive the prohibition. If you're doing it as a tzorech davar hamutar, since your aim is to get something mutar, and it's the tzorech Shabbos, you want to eat this vegetable on Shabbos, therefore it would be allowed. So in the Ritzvah's understanding, it's not that you are less engaging with the Muktza in the case where you're doing Tiltul and HaTzad in order to get something mutar. It's equal engagement in the Muktza. It's just as serious an act. However, there's a deferment and a reduction in Hilchos Muktza, an allowance in Hilchos Muktza when it's done the Tzorech Shabbos or the Tzorech Heta. It's a very different concept to the first svara that we said. The first svara we said was that if you're moving a Muktza item indirectly for the sake of a non-Muktza use, you're not engaging with the Muktza. The prohibition of Muktza, we said from the beginning of learning Muktza, is an engagement with Muktza, is a use of Muktza, shkamashus of Muktza, relationship to Muktza. If you're moving a Muktza item, physically it's indirect. Intention-wise, it's for the sake of something Muktza. That's not an engagement with Muktza. The Ritzvah says a very different story. The Ritzvah says, no, it's Tiltul Minatzad, Tiltul Minatzad Shmei Tiltul. You are engaging with the Muktza item. However, it's allowed because it's deferred for the sake of Shabbos, for Tzorech Shabbos, because you're doing it for the sake of Davar HaMutar. Enough gemina perhaps would be if you're not doing it for the sake of Shabbos, for some reason you want to access a non-Muktza item, which is Davar Mutar, but not for the sake of Shabbos particularly, it's not necessary for Shabbos. The Ritzvah would say, no, the whole thing is a heta, is an allowance because of needs of Shabbos. So the first svara would say, yeah, that's okay because I'm not engaging with Muktza. This isn't an engagement with Muktza. So this is a second explanation. In the Ritzvah, it's a in the Ritzvah, it's because it's Tzorech Shabbos, therefore it would be allowed. The Ozerua, which I printed, and the Ozerua is a halachic work written by one of the later Rishonim from Austria, Vienna. It's not arranged on the order of the daf. It's arranged in the order of halacha. So this is Hilchos Shabbos. I saw this referenced in other sources and then found the Ozerua. It's not my own knowledge. I wish I knew the Ozerua, but I don't. The Ozerua gives a third explanation of the Gemara, literally the other way around. He says fundamentally, Tiltul min HaTzad is not a problem of Muktza because I'm only indirectly engaging with the Muktza. However, if you're moving it for the sake of the Muktza item, we're worried that you will come to move the Muktza item. And therefore, even indirect engagement is a problem. However, if I'm indirectly engaging with Muktza, where I have no interest in the Muktza, my interest is the Mutter item, there we're not worried that you'll end up moving the Muktza item directly, and therefore it's allowed. So we have really three very contrasting svaras. We have the view of the Ritzvah that fundamentally Tiltul min HaTzad, and it's a special allowance for the needs of Shabbos. We have the view of the Ozerua that fundamentally Tiltul min HaTzad is always allowed because it's indirect, and it's a stringency because we're worried if you're doing it for the sake of Muktza, you'll end up moving the Muktza. And we have the middle svara, which is a subtle svara, and I think the most beautiful of the svaras, which says, no, look in each circumstance. If you're doing indirect movement for the sake of Muktza, that's engaging with Muktza. If you're doing indirect movement not for the sake of Muktza, then you're not engaging Muktza. So we'll stop here for today. I would encourage everyone on Sunday, please look at the Ritzvah, see where I'm bringing this Ritzvah, look at the Rif and see if you see what the Rif is doing, look at the Run. I printed also a few Shulchan Aruchs with Mishnah Berurah and Shatzion. I put in pale grey. If you have time, as I said, learn all the Mishnah Berurahs because they're good chazorah on Hilchos Bostis and things we've done previously, but the bits that are relevant to our sugya are printed in black. And in Mitzvah Hashem, next Tuesday, we'll carry on looking and we'll consider in more depth these three possibilities and see what evidence we can bring for each combination. Yeah,
Thank you.
yes. So you'd have to work through. First of all, Hilchos Bosses is the drawer a bosses for the Muktza. In other words, if you deliberately left money in the drawer, maybe the drawer is subsumed to the Muktza item and never choose its own Muktza item. Correct. If it's not a bosses, then it wouldn't be a problem at all. That's exactly right. That's this Mishnah. If you have time, go through even the light grey Mishnah Berurahs, and that will clarify. He literally speaks about your scenario about money left in the drawer. Yeah. So if you have time, go do it. It's really the previous sugya bosses. We'll get back to bosses later on. Don't worry about it. I'm sorry, I tried so hard to give the sources this time.